The first time Sergeant Mara Ivers saw the enemy's formation through her visor, she didn't think countless was an exaggeration. It was a damn understatement. The horizon itself was moving. Waves of bodies in armor the color of rust, banners that shimmered like blood under the pale twin suns. Even through her suit's filters, she could smell the ozone and the tang of heat from their plasma batteries charging. She crouched lower in the trench, mud sucking at the knees of her exosuit. Around her, the rest of Third Company checked ammo belts and power packs, quiet except for the low clicks of rifles cycling. It was the kind of silence you only heard before a slaughter, one that carried more weight than any prayer. "Command says the Verta numbers exceed projection by a factor of 12, said Corporal Hahn, her spotter. His voice was a dry rasp over comms, too calm to be real. "That's what, 200,000 visible units? 200,000 that we can see," Mara replied, scanning the ridge line. "The rest were probably hidden behind jamming fields and mist. And they're walking right into a choke point. They think they can drown us in bodies. Can they?" Mara's jaw clenched. "They haven't fought humans before." A ripple of static broke across the comms net, followed by the colonel's voice, gravelly, old school, the kind of man who'd once fought ground wars on Luna's dust plains before most of them were born. "Third Company, this is command. You hold grid theta until I say otherwise. No retreat, no surrender. The Verta think they can break us by sheer weight. We'll show them what a Deathworlder line looks like. You know the drill. Make it count." The channel went silent again. Mara leaned back against the wall of the trench, feeling her heart hammering against her chest plate. "You heard him," she said to the squad. "No one gives up ground. No one breaks. If they want this hill, they'll choke on it." A low chuckle rippled through the squad, grim, tired, but real. They'd fought together long enough that words weren't needed after that. The Verta assault began like a storm. Plasma shells rained from the sky, tearing craters out of the mud. The ground shook so hard that Mara's teeth clattered against her helmet visor. The first barrage lasted 20 minutes straight, and when it finally stopped, the world was a haze of smoke, burning ozone, and static. Then came the sound. It wasn't a roar or a shout. It was worse, a low, resonant hum that made the air tremble. The Verta were chanting. They didn't fight for money or politics. They fought because their empire told them humans were a disease, a contagion that needed to be purged. Mara pressed her back tighter against the trench wall. "Eyes up, they're coming!" Shapes emerged from the fog, hulking insectoid forms with glistening chitin armor and multiple arms, carrying energy rifles that hissed with heat. They moved fast, too fast, the kind of speed that made rookies freeze, but not her squad. Now! The human line lit up with a roar of rail fire. The recoil hammered through Mara's shoulders as her rifle spat hypersonic slugs that punched through Verta armor like paper. Each shot snapped through the air with the crack of thunder, cutting down wave after wave of charging aliens. They kept coming. Han switched to the drone feed. "Left flank collapsing, 500 meters. Redirect Squad Delta." "Seal the breach," Mara barked. "Mortar team, grid 592. Explosions tore the ridge open. Chitin fragments and acid blood sprayed across the mud. One of the Verta war machines, a four-legged siege walker, lurched forward on fire before collapsing into the trench. The impact shook the ground hard enough to throw Mara against the wall. She tasted blood through her respirator. "Status," she yelled. "Alpha's holding. Delta's half gone. Epsilon's requesting medevac. Denied. No birds until we clear the skies." A plasma round slammed into the trench 2 meters away, vaporizing a soldier in a burst of blue-white light. The heat flash scorched her armor, and for a second, everything went white. She blinked hard, clearing her HUD. The name that had just vanished from the team list hit her harder than the blast. Private Wren, 19 years old, quiet kid from New Jakarta. Loved chess. Mara swore under her breath and forced herself to focus. There'd be time for grief later. Maybe. The first wave broke. Bodies piled in the trenches, Verta and human alike. The field went eerily quiet, except for the hiss of burning armor and the soft whine of dying machines. Then command came back online. Good work, Third Company. You held. Reinforcements en route. ETA 4 hours. Prepare for another push. Sensors show movement beyond the ridge. Bigger signatures this time, Han cursed softly. If that was the small wave... Mara reloaded, her movements sharp, controlled. Then the next one's the real test. She could feel the exhaustion creeping in. Her muscles ached under the exosuit. Her throat was raw from shouting, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline crash. She'd been fighting for 16 hours straight. So had everyone else. But no one complained. No one even mentioned it. They were humans. They came from a world where everything tried to kill you, from gravity to disease to the weather itself. They didn't win wars with numbers. They won them by refusing to die. By the third hour, the sky turned orange with ash. The second Verta wave appeared over the ridge, larger, tighter, organized. This time their banners glowed with command sigils. Officers, Mara activated her helmet cam, transmitting live data back to command. Confirming secondary assault group, mass formation, roughly 70,000 strong, advancing with armored support. Copy, came the colonel's voice. We're sending drone reinforcements from the southern valley. Hold the ridge at all costs. If they breach Theta, the colony falls. That was the thing about these colonies. Barely habitable worlds, rough terrain, thin air. Only humans would try to make homes out of such places. The Verta saw it as arrogance. The humans saw it as proof. The second wave hit harder. Verta artillery bracketed the ridge, cutting them off from the rest of the defense line. Mara's company fought alone now, isolated, surrounded, with comms flickering from interference. The trench became a nightmare of smoke and screams. Mara fought hand-to-hand as the aliens flooded the line. Her exosuit's servos screamed as she jammed a combat knife between the mandibles of a charging Verta. Its blood hissed across her visor, corrosive and smoking. She didn't even flinch. Han went down next to her, plasma burning through his shoulder plate. She dragged him behind a mound of dirt and slapped a nanogel patch over the wound. "You're fine," she lied. He tried to laugh but only coughed blood. "Yeah, sure, Sarge. Like New Jakarta fine?" She smirked, then turned back to the line. The air shimmered as a Verta walker climbed over the ridge, 30 feet tall, 4 cannons glowing hot. Mara dove behind cover as it unleashed hell. Plasma bolts tore through the trenches like meteor strikes. "Anti-armor team. Now!" she shouted. 2 soldiers hefted rail launchers onto their shoulders. They fired simultaneously, the twin streaks of light slamming into the walker's knee joints. The machine screamed, a horrible metallic howl, as it toppled forward, crashing into its own lines. The shockwave threw Mara off her feet again. She hit the mud hard, breath knocked out of her. When she looked up, the walker's burning carcass was lying half in the trench, its molten armor lighting up the night like a second sun. That was when she realized something cold and sharp in the pit of her stomach. They weren't retreating. The Verta kept coming, climbing over the dead, screaming in their guttural language. There was no strategy, no flanking, just raw, endless numbers. "Third Company," came the colonel's voice, strained but steady. "Listen carefully. Orbital strike in 5 minutes. Pull back to the fallback point. Mark your coordinates and dig in." Mara glanced at the horizon. "Sir, we'll never clear the radius in time." "Understood," he said after a pause. "Then hold fast. Make it count." She closed her eyes for half a second, letting the fatigue wash over her. Then she stood, slammed a fresh magazine into her rifle, and yelled over comms, "You heard the man! No retreat! Make every round hurt!" And for the next 5 minutes, they did. Every soldier, every gun, every last breath poured into the defense. They weren't fighting for glory anymore. They were fighting because humanity didn't bow, didn't break. When the sky lit up white and the orbital round came screaming down, Mara smiled behind her visor, because she knew the truth the Verta were about to learn. You can outnumber humans, you can surround them, you can burn the ground beneath their feet, but you can't scare a Deathworlder. The blast tore the horizon apart for a full 30 seconds. There was nothing but blinding white light and the roar of the atmosphere itself screaming in protest. The orbital strike hit with the fury of a god, vaporizing thousands of Verta, ripping open the ground, and turning the ridge into molten glass. When the shockwave rolled through what was left of Grid Theta, Sergeant Mara Ivers was buried alive. Her helmet display shattered, Shud flickering with static. The world went black and silent except for her heartbeat. Then came the crushing weight. Dirt, debris, armor fragments pressing down on her chest. For a moment she thought she was dead. Then she coughed, tasted blood, and realized death hadn't taken her yet. "Han?" Her voice cracked over the comms, but only static answered. She pushed against the rubble, servos in her exosuit whining as she forced herself free. A slab of metal shifted, light cutting through the dust like a blade. When she finally crawled out, she froze. The ridge was gone. The trench line, gone. What used to be a battlefield was now a cratered wasteland stretching to the horizon, glowing faintly red with residual heat. The air shimmered, thick with burning particulate. And the silence. It wasn't peace. It was the silence of everything being dead. "Command, this is Sergeant Ivers, 3rd Company," she rasped. "Do you copy?" Nothing. Her visor's comms array was fried. She manually switched to short-range frequencies. Anyone from 3rd, respond." A burst of static. Then a voice, weak but alive. "Sarge, it's Han." She turned sharply. The locator ping came from 40 meters south, near the remains of what had been the mortar pit. She sprinted, boots crunching through glassed soil. Han was half buried, armor cracked and fused from heat. His faceplate was shattered, eyes squinting against the glare. But he was breathing. "Damn cockroach," Mara muttered, hauling him out with a grunt. "Guess orbital fire can't kill either of us," he wheezed. "Don't test it." They sat for a moment, watching the faint embers fall from the sky. Overhead, the orbital carrier Shenzhen was a distant spark, its bombardment array cooling. Mara tried not to think about how many lives had been erased in the last few minutes. Verta and human alike. "Status?" Han asked after a minute, voice small. "Don't know yet. We'll find survivors, re-establish comms, and figure out what the hell's left of command." "Think they're all gone?" Mara looked at the horizon. "I think we're it until proven otherwise." They moved through the wreckage, rifles ready, scanning for life signs. Bodies, hundreds of them, lay twisted in the scorched ground. Some were Verta, armor melted into their exoskeletons. Others were human, indistinguishable under layers of soot and ash. By nightfall, they'd found 5 survivors. Corporal Ruiz, missing an arm but still carrying his rifle. Private Amani, deafened but alive. 2 engineers, Tanner and Cho, who'd been in a bunker when the strike hit. And Lieutenant Callan, bleeding from a chest wound but conscious enough to take command. They gathered under the shattered remains of a transport crawler. The air was thin, acrid. The colony's atmosphere scrubbers had likely been damaged. They'd have to ration filters if they wanted to last the night. Callan's voice was ragged, but his eyes were sharp. "You did good, Ivers. You kept 3rd from folding." "Most of 3rd's ash, sir," Mara said quietly. "Then the rest of us will have to be enough." He unrolled a half-burned tactical map. "Intel says this was the primary Verta vanguard. The strike took out most of their forward force. But their main army is still inbound. Orbital scans before the blackout counted over 1 million signatures. ETA less than 36 hours. Han swore softly. 1 million? Colin nodded. "And we've got, what, 7 guns left between us? Maybe a few hundred survivors scattered planet-wide?" "We're not winning this," Mara didn't answer. She didn't believe in winning anymore. "Only surviving long enough to make the other side pay for every inch," Callan continued. "We can't hold Theta. It's gone. We move north to Outpost Kilo. It's buried under the mountain ridge. Harder for their scanners to pick up. We regroup, rearm, and signal Shenzhen once the radiation clears. Understood?" The group nodded. The march began at dawn. The terrain was broken and hostile. Fields of slag and twisted metal, still glowing faintly where plasma had scorched deep. Their boots sank into black dust that clung to armor joints. Every step felt like walking on the bones of the dead. Mara led the column, rifle raised, scanning constantly. Han limped beside her, one arm in a sling but refusing to be left behind. Around midday, the silence broke. A faint, rhythmic thudding echoed in the distance. At first it sounded like wind. Then the pattern grew heavier. Measured. Marching. Varta patrols. Mara ducked behind a ridge, motioning for the others to follow. They crouched low, watching the horizon. Through the haze, figures appeared. Rows of Verta soldiers moving in perfect formation. Banners fluttering. Their carapaces glinting. Hundreds of them. Searching. They're sweeping for survivors, Han whispered. Mara's fingers tightened on her rifle. Let them find ghosts. They waited until the column was close. Too close. Then Mara gave the signal. The squad opened fire in synchronized bursts, cutting through the Verta ranks before they even reacted. The rail slugs punched through armor and bodies, exploding into sprays of molten ichor. The Verta shrieked, returning fire in wild plasma arcs. The ridge turned into chaos. Mara rolled behind cover, firing controlled bursts. She saw Ruiz take a bolt through the leg but keep shooting, cursing through clenched teeth. Amani hurled a frag that detonated mid-air, scattering the aliens' formation. The humans moved like they were born for this kind of fight. Low, fast, efficient. Deathworld instincts honed by a lifetime of surviving worse odds. Within minutes, the patrol was wiped out. Silence again. Only this time, the kind that came after victory. Han exhaled shakily. That was messy. Good messy, Ruiz muttered, dragging himself back into cover. Reminded them we're not dead yet. Mara glanced at the bodies. They'll report this. The Verta don't take humiliation lightly. Then they'll send more, Han said. Good. By dusk, they reached the outer cliffs of Outpost Kilo. The base had been partially buried from seismic activity months ago, but that was why Command had chosen it as fallback. Underground. Shielded. Hidden. Cho found the access hatch half buried under slag. It took them 2 hours to clear and override the locks, but when the doors finally hissed open, a rush of cold air spilled out. The emergency lights flickered to life. The bunker was intact. Inside they found supplies, oxygen tanks, ammo crates, med kits, and an old communications terminal. It was a tomb of steel and dust, but it was hope. Callan slumped into a chair, pale from blood loss. Set perimeter sensors. We'll rest 4 hours, then attempt contact with Shenzhen. While the others worked, Mara moved deeper into the bunker, drawn by a faint hum. The sound came from the secondary comms room, old tech, half-fried, but something in the array was still running. She wiped the dust from a cracked screen. A signal flickered weakly. Encrypted, human. Hello? She said into the mic. This is Sergeant Ivers, 3rd Company Ground Forces. Anyone copy? A burst of static, then faintly. Ivers? This is Shenzhen Command. Thank God. We lost your beacon after the strike. Status? Mara's throat tightened. Minimal survivors. Theta's destroyed. We've established temporary shelter at Outpost Kilo. Copy that. Listen carefully, we've got more bad news. The orbital strike crippled their vanguard, but the Verta fleet entered atmosphere. They're deploying full invasion forces planet-wide. You'll have to hold Kilo until we can bring reinforcements from Sol. ETA, 3 weeks. 3 weeks. On a half-dead planet with 1 million hostiles. Mara exhaled slowly. Understood. The line cut again, but it was enough. They weren't abandoned. She returned to the main chamber. Han was cleaning his rifle by lantern light, face smeared with soot. What's the word? He asked. They're coming, she said. All of them. We're the last wall between the Verta and the colony core. Han gave a tired grin. Then I hope they brought enough bodies. Mara looked around at the survivors. Ruiz reloading, Amani sleeping with her rifle in her lap. Callan murmuring orders through pain. These weren't soldiers anymore. They were ghosts, battle-scarred, half-dead, and stubborn as hell. Outside, thunder rolled. The ground trembled faintly, the kind of tremor that came from something enormous moving in the distance. The next wave had begun to march. Mara stepped out to the bunker's entrance, helmet under her arm. The horizon was glowing again, plasma flares blooming like storms. She whispered under her breath, "Countless armies, huh?" The wind carried the scent of ash. Let them come. They began fortifying Outpost Kilo before dawn. There was no morning anymore. Not really. Just the dull gray haze that hung over the planet's surface, stained by plasma ash and dust. The sun was a weak red coin in the sky, casting long shadows across the cliffs. Every ridge, every slope, every path leading toward the bunker became a kill zone. Sergeant Mara Ivers had stopped counting the hours since the orbital strike. Time had lost its rhythm. She only knew they had maybe a day, maybe less, before the Verta found them again. The bunker was half buried in basalt, its entrance a narrow passage between jagged rocks. It was built for mining, not war, but humans were good at repurposing whatever hell they were given. Han and Amani rigged old mining drones as sentry turrets. Ruiz set up trip mines using stripped-out plasma cores. The engineers, Cho and Tanner, rerouted the fusion generators to power the rail emplacements. Every piece of metal was turned into armor plating or shrapnel. Callan, still pale and coughing blood, stayed near the command console, his voice low but steady as he coordinated their defense. He'd been hit too deep to move much, but no one questioned his right to lead. By nightfall, the bunker felt less like a tomb and more like a heartbeat, humming with human hands making war out of scraps. Mara sat on a rock just outside the entrance, helmet off, eyes scanning the horizon. The air tasted like iron. Her hands shook when she wasn't thinking about it. Han limped over, lowering himself beside her with a grunt. "You're staring like the world owes you something." "It does," she said quietly. "It owes me peace," he gave a dry laugh. "You picked the wrong species for that." They sat in silence for a while. Somewhere behind them, Ruiz was humming softly while checking ammo crates. The sound was oddly comforting. Normal, almost. Then the sensors pinged. "Movement," Amani called from the entrance. "South Ridge, 800 meters. Big heat signatures." Mara stood instantly, helmet sliding back into place. "Positions." This is it. They moved fast, practiced. Every survivor had a station. Gunners on the emplacements, spotters in the cracks above, engineers monitoring power flow. The air grew tense, the kind of thick electric quiet that only came before slaughter. The first shapes appeared through the haze. Verta infantry, hundreds of them, climbing the ridge in near-silent formation. Their armor was darker now, sleeker, adapted. They'd learned from the last encounter. Behind them marched heavier silhouettes, walkers and gun platforms, their weapons glowing faintly blue. "Range?" Mara asked. 600 meters and closing," Amani replied. "Wait for it." The Verta crested the final ridge. "Now!" The cliffside erupted. Rail slugs screamed through the air, tearing into the alien lines. Explosive rounds shredded the walkers' legs, sending them tumbling back into their own troops. The sentry drones came online, spitting arcs of plasma into the advancing horde. The Verta responded instantly. Their return fire turned the rocks into molten spray. But the humans didn't retreat. They moved like shadows, popping up, firing, disappearing before counterfire could lock on. Mara ducked behind cover, chambered another round, and fired into a cluster of alien command units. One exploded in a burst of orange flame, splattering molten chitin across the slope. Han's turret overheated, smoke billowing from the barrel. "Coolant's shot. Use it till it melts," Mara shouted back. He grinned behind his cracked visor. "Was hoping you'd say that." The battle raged for hours. The Verta adapted fast. They began to spread their formations, using plasma mortars to flush the humans out. Each hit sent tremors through the bunker walls. Cho rerouted power 3 times to keep the shield emitters stable. Ruiz lost his other arm to a near miss, but refused to stop firing, yelling curses that would have made a drill sergeant blush. When the first wave finally faltered, the ground was a carpet of smoking bodies. The air shimmered from heat and blood vapor, but Mara knew better than to celebrate. "They'll be back," she said, reloading. "They're testing us." Han nodded grimly. "And learning." They didn't have to wait long. 2 hours later, seismic sensors picked up movement beneath the ground. Subterranean signatures, Tanner reported. They're tunneling under the ridge. Mara's eyes widened. They're trying to come up beneath us. She sprinted to the supply bay, grabbed a pack of seismic charges, and motioned to Han. With me! They followed the tunnel readings down the service shafts. Tight, pitch-black corridors filled with the hum of old machines. The deeper they went, the stronger the vibrations became. Finally, they heard it. The faint scraping of claws against stone. 3 meters, Han whispered. Mara set the charges along the wall, calibrating them to blow inward. When they breach, we light them up. The sound grew louder. The rock bulged. A crack split open, and the first Verta soldier crawled through, mandibles snapping. Mara hit the detonator. The explosion ripped the tunnel apart, collapsing it in on itself. Dust and heat washed over them, throwing both against the wall. When the echo died, nothing moved. Han coughed, his voice hoarse. Remind me to never follow you into a tunnel again. Noted, she said, helping him to his feet. They climbed back up to the bunker, clothes coated in ash. Above, the second wave had already begun. This time, the Verta came in full force. Not hundreds, but thousands, flooding across the plains in formation, backed by siege crawlers and aerial drones. The sky burned with contrails. Mara didn't wait for orders. Light up everything, she roared. Make them earn every damn meter. The bunker became a fortress of noise and fury. The railguns screamed. The drones buzzed like angry wasps, and the ground shook under the sheer weight of enemy fire. Plasma bolts carved glowing trails through the darkness, cutting through the rock walls like knives. Inside the bunker, Callan struggled to stay conscious, blood seeping through his uniform. He leaned over the comms console, voice weak but determined. This is Outpost Kilo to Shenzhen. We are under heavy assault. Repeat, heavy assault. Request immediate orbital support. Static. Then a faint, broken voice. Negative, Kilo. Enemy jamming. Reinforcements ETA 2 days. Hold position. 2 days. Mara heard the message and just nodded. We'll hold. Outside, the ground trembled harder. A massive Verta war beast, half machine, half flesh, climbed the ridge, bristling with energy cannons. It roared, the sound like thunder tearing through metal. Amani gaped. That thing's bigger than a tank. Mara grabbed the last rail launcher. Then it's mine. She sprinted up the slope, ignoring the plasma bursts exploding around her. She slid behind a chunk of debris, aimed, and fired. The first shot hit the creature's shoulder, staggering it. She reloaded, aimed again, and fired straight into its mouth. The detonation was catastrophic. The beast's entire torso ruptured in a bloom of blue-white light. Its carcass crashed into the cliffside, taking a dozen Verta soldiers with it. Mara dropped the launcher, breath ragged, ears ringing. Below, Han and the others were still firing, holding the line with sheer willpower. Every gun barrel glowed red. Every face was streaked with soot. When the Verta finally began to pull back, it wasn't because they'd been ordered to. It was because they'd realized something the humans had known all along. No matter how many came, the Deathworlders didn't break. The survivors slumped where they stood. Amani sat on the floor, hands trembling as she reloaded another magazine even though no one was shooting anymore. Han laughed softly, the sound more exhaustion than humor. Still alive? He said. Still ugly. Mara dropped next to him, helmet hanging from her hand. You smell worse than the corpses. That's victory, Sarge. Ruiz chuckled weakly from across the room. Victory smells like burning bug guts and human sweat. Write that in the history books. They didn't cheer. They didn't smile for long. They just breathed. Callan, slumped in his chair, whispered through blood-stained lips. They'll come again tomorrow. Mara nodded. Let them. We've still got ammo. He gave a faint grin. That's what I like about you Deathworlders. You think bullets are a renewable resource. Then he closed his eyes. His chest stopped moving. No one spoke for a long time. Mara finally stood, pulling the colonel's dog tags from around his neck. She looked out at the smoldering battlefield beyond the bunker. The horizon glowed faintly from the fires of their defiance. "He bought us time," she said quietly. "We won't waste it." Han limped to her side. "So what now?" "Now we prepare. Because they'll come with everything next time." She looked toward the clouds, where faint lights marked the edges of the Verta fleet descending. "They think we're trapped in a hole," she murmured. "They still don't understand." Han raised an eyebrow. "Understand what?" "That humans don't dig graves," Mara said. "We dig foxholes." The fourth day was the quietest. Too quiet. Mara had learned that silence on a battlefield was worse than any bombardment. It meant the enemy was thinking. And the Verta, for all their arrogance, were not stupid. The skies had turned a permanent grayish black, choked by ash and static. The air shimmered with heat, heavy and metallic. The humans inside Outpost Kilo had long stopped checking the time. The world outside existed only in bursts. Flashes of plasma light, the scream of rail fire, the sudden silence after death. There were 19 of them left. 19 soldiers holding a fortress meant for hundreds. They'd slept maybe 2 hours in the past 48. Food rations were gone. Their water was thick with the taste of recycled sweat. But no one complained. Complaining took energy, and energy was a currency they couldn't afford. Han sat at the comms desk, trying to coax a signal out of the static storm that never ended. His hands shook from exhaustion. Every time he blinked, his vision swam with after-images of plasma fire. "Still nothing," he muttered. "Either they're jamming or Shenzhen's too far to hear us." "They'll hear us eventually," Mara said. Her voice was hoarse, stripped to sandpaper. "They have to." Ruiz coughed from the floor where he'd propped himself against the wall. "Both arms gone now. One to shrapnel, one to infection. Still breathing, still cracking jokes. If they don't come soon, you'll have to start cooking me for protein." "Too stringy," Mara said. He grinned weakly. Flattering. They'd turned dark humor into survival instinct. Laugh or break. Amani was on watch at the entrance, peering through a cracked sensor scope. "Movement," she said softly. Mara joined her, kneeling beside the viewport. At first she saw nothing, just smoke and shadow. Then a faint shimmer. "Camouflage," she whispered. "They're cloaked." The Verta had evolved their tactics again. They were done with frontal assaults. This was infiltration, surgical, smarter. "Han, seal the lower levels," she ordered. "Cho, get the drones powered. Ruiz, just don't die." He saluted with the stump of his arm. "No promises." They set the defense in silence, each movement automatic from repetition. The tension was a physical thing now, thick enough to taste. Then the sensors lit up red. Dozens of signals, no, hundreds, materialized out of thin air all around the outpost. The cloaking field dropped, revealing a swarm of Verta soldiers advancing low and fast. "Contact!" Amani yelled. The first plasma bolts hit the outer defenses, sizzling against the shield barrier. The humans fired back, a storm of rail slugs and grenades tearing through the smoke. But the Verta were relentless, crawling forward even as their comrades fell. Mara felt the ground shake under her boots. "They're using burrowers again! Cho, lock down the floor vents!" The engineer was already moving, sealing off the lower levels. Sparks rained from the ceiling as a plasma bolt ripped through the outer wall. The smell of scorched metal filled the bunker. Han switched to manual control on the turrets. "Left flank's gone." "Then shift power to the right." Mara yelled. "I can't, the grid's blown." "Then reroute it through the mining rig." "That'll overload." "Do it!" He did. The floor lights flickered, then glowed blood red as the remaining generators screamed under the load. The right side defenses came back online, firing a curtain of plasma that turned the hillside into a furnace. The Verta screamed, a harsh, inhuman chorus that vibrated through the walls. Han glanced at Mara. "They're not retreating this time." "No," she said. "They're testing how long we'll last." Minutes bled into hours. The battle became a blur of light and sound. Cho went down when a support beam collapsed. Amani dragged him out of the smoke, coughing, his leg gone from the knee down. He was still screaming orders about power flow even as Mara pressed a tourniquet over the stump. Hold it together, she shouted. We're not done yet. He tried to laugh but only choked. You really think this hole's gonna hold forever? Long enough, she said. Outside, the ridge glowed with the corpses of alien soldiers. The heat was unbearable, radiation levels climbing by the minute. The atmosphere was turning against both sides now. Even the Vertas advanced. Respirators were beginning to fail. The world itself had become a weapon. That gave Mara an idea. She sprinted to the command console, wiping soot off the surface. Tanner, can you hear me? The old engineer's voice came faintly through the static. Barely. What's left of me's at the core systems. I need you to access the geothermal regulator. The one connected to the mining conduits under the valley. You trying to fry us all? If it takes them with us, yeah. A pause. Then a dry laugh. Knew I liked you for a reason. She felt the bunker tremble as Tanner began the override sequence. The outpost had been built atop an unstable magma channel. The miners had tapped it for energy once. Now Mara planned to turn it into a trap. A planetary-scale bomb. She patched into the comms. All units, fall back to inner chamber. We're setting the ridge to blow. Han's voice came through ragged. Are you serious? Dead serious, move. They retreated deeper into the bunker, sealing bulkheads as they went. The Verta poured in through the outer corridors, swarming like insects. Plasma fire lit the darkness as the humans fell back room by room. Mara was the last to leave the command deck. She looked one last time at the feed, the ridge crawling with alien soldiers, their banners rising again. Countless, endless. Not today, she muttered. Then she hit the final command. The ground convulsed. A deep, thunderous roar rolled through the planet's crust. The floor split open in fiery cracks, molten light spilling through like veins of hell. The ridge erupted, a column of fire shooting miles into the sky. The blast vaporized everything on the surface. Verta soldiers, machines, and siege towers vanished in an instant. The shockwave turned the air itself into flame. Inside the bunker, the walls groaned under the pressure. Metal warped, alarms screamed. Mara clung to a support beam as the world above them disintegrated. Then, silence. Thick, heavy, absolute. When the smoke cleared, the bunker was half collapsed but standing. Mara staggered to her feet, coughing. The heat was unbearable. Her suit's internal coolants were failing. She pulled off her helmet and sucked in a breath of scorched air. Around her, the survivors were few. Han, Amani, Ruiz, barely conscious. Tanner's voice came faintly through a speaker. He hadn't made it out of the core. You did it, Sarge, he said weakly. The whole ridge, gone. A few thousand bugs with it. How bad's the damage? She asked. Bad enough that if you live through this, you'll wish you hadn't. Then the line went dead. Mara stood there for a long time, watching the glowing cracks in the walls. The air shimmered with residual heat. Han limped up beside her, his face streaked with ash. You realize we just cracked the crust of a planet? Yeah. Think Command'll give us a medal for that? She snorted. Maybe a reprimand for property damage. He chuckled. A hollow, broken sound. They'll name this place after us. No, Mara said quietly. They'll bury it. They emerged hours later through a fissure blown open in the cliffside. The air outside was unrecognizable. Molten rivers flowing down into what used to be the valley, the sky burning orange. The Verta army was gone. No movement, no sound. Just heat and ruin. Mara sank to her knees, staring at the destruction. We did it, she said softly. We stopped them. Han looked at the horizon, where the faint silhouette of the Verta fleet still hung in orbit. Stopped one army. They've got 100 more up there. Then we'll stop those too. He turned to her, incredulous. You can't be serious. I'm always serious. She stood, tightening the straps of her damaged armor. They came here thinking they could erase humanity. Instead, they found out what happens when you corner Deathworlders. Han shook his head, smiling faintly despite himself. You're insane. Probably. They started walking north, away from the molten field, toward the mountains where the colony core still lay hidden. The radio crackled once faintly, with a signal from orbit. This is Shenzhen Command to all surviving ground units. We detect massive geothermal activity at Grid Theta. Casualties? Mara lifted her mic. Most of us, but we're still breathing. A pause. Then, copy that, Sergeant. Reinforcements inbound. Hold position. She looked up at the sky where streaks of light marked incoming dropships. Guess someone finally heard us, Han murmured. Yeah, she said. Took 'em long enough. But as she watched the horizon burn, she knew it wasn't over. The Verta fleet was regrouping, dark shapes moving among the clouds. They'd lost an army, but not their pride. Mara raised her rifle, even though the barrel was warped. Let them come again, she whispered. We've got more fire left. The planet itself glowed beneath their boots, cracked, bleeding, alive. A death world reborn. And the humans who survived it were no longer just soldiers. They were the storm. The dropships came through the clouds like ghosts. At first, Mara thought she was hallucinating. Too long without rest, too long surrounded by death and fire. But then she heard the low hum of engines cutting through the storm, the deep rhythmic thud of landing gear punching into ash, human craft, real. Amani fell to her knees, laughing and sobbing at the same time. Han leaned against a melted boulder, shaking his head in disbelief. I'll be damned, he muttered. They actually came. Mara just stood there watching the nearest dropship descend through the haze. Its hull was scarred and soot-streaked, bearing the insignia of the Shenzhen. When the hatch opened, fresh air hissed out, filtered, cool, and almost alien in its purity. The first troopers who stepped out froze when they saw her. Jesus, one whispered. Are you human? She almost smiled. Last time I checked. They moved fast after that, sweeping the area, setting up med tents, scanning for survivors. The ridge was still smoking, molten rock still dripping down into the valley. The destruction stretched for kilometers, a scar visible even from orbit. The medics tried to treat Ruiz, but his pulse had faded. Amani sat beside him as they zipped the bag shut, her face blank, eyes hollow. Mara didn't say anything. There were no words left that hadn't already been burned away. Inside the triage tent, she stripped off her armor. Every plate melted, every seam cracked. The medtech ran a scanner over her chest, frowning. 2 broken ribs, partial lung collapse, radiation exposure. Just patch me up, she said. He hesitated. You need rest. So does the war. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded and injected her with a stabilizer. You Deathworlders are all the same. Damn right, she murmured. Hours passed. The survivors were loaded onto the Shenzhen's landing craft, one by one. When it was her turn, Mara hesitated at the hatch. She looked back one last time. The ridge where her platoon had fought. Now just fire and glass. Goodbye, Kilo, she whispered. Then she stepped inside. Orbit felt unreal. The stars looked too clean, too silent. Below them, the planet still burned. Captain Ibarra met her in the command bay, uniform immaculate despite the chaos. His face softened when he saw her, the first genuine human expression she'd seen in weeks. Sergeant Cade, he said quietly. Hell of a thing you did down there. Just doing my job, sir, he snorted. You cracked a planet's crust to stop an invasion. That's more than a job. Mara said nothing. He leaned on the table, tapping a display. We've analyzed the debris field. You took out 2 Verta divisions and their forward command unit. They've pulled their fleet back to high orbit. They're scared. Scared? She repeated, disbelief in her voice. They lost a few thousand soldiers. They've got billions more. Maybe, Ibarra said. But they've never seen anything like what you pulled off. The Verta see themselves as a perfect military machine. Efficient, logical, predictable. You? You burned the rule book and made the ground fight back, she gave a dry laugh. So what now? We throw medals at corpses and call it victory. He looked at her for a long time. No, we take the fight to them. She turned toward the viewport. Outside, the stars glittered like shrapnel. We barely held one outpost. You think we can take on their entire fleet? Ibarra's voice was steady. Not with what we have. But command's been listening to their transmissions. The Verta are confused. Their caste system can't explain what happened on Talanis 9. They're calling it the world of madness. Some think the planet itself rose up to fight them. Mara's lips twitched. Good, let them think that. They already do. And Command wants to make sure they never forget it. He tapped another screen. The display zoomed out to show a cluster of planets. All Verta-held worlds. We're starting a new phase. Covert units, deep infiltration, psychological disruption. Deathworld tactics. You're being transferred to Task Force Ironvale, she frowned. You want me to train them? I want you to lead them, she exhaled slowly. And if I say no? He smiled faintly. You won't. He was right. 2 weeks later, Mara stood in the hangar bay of the Resolute Dawn, staring at the new recruits. 24 soldiers, men and women drawn from every corner of human space. Veterans, ex-miners, salvagers, even convicts. None of them looked polished. None of them looked clean. But their eyes had that same hard edge. The look of people who'd survived something they shouldn't have. She walked down the line slowly. You've all heard the rumors, she began. Talanis 9, the Ridge of Fire, the Verta's World of Madness. You've heard that humans cracked the ground open just to win a battle. I'm here to tell you, it's true. A murmur ran through the line. She continued, voice steady. The Verta think we're animals. Irrational, dangerous. They're right. Because on a death world, survival doesn't come from logic. It comes from will. From refusing to die when the universe tells you to. She paused, looking each soldier in the eye. That's what we're going to teach them. That humans don't fight fair. That we don't quit. That if they come for our worlds again, they'll find hell waiting. No applause. No cheers. Just grim nods. The kind of silence that means commitment. Han approached afterward, limping slightly but alive. He wore new armor now, matte gray, scarred already from training drills. Never thought we'd be back in uniform again, he said. Never thought we'd still be breathing, she replied. He grinned. So what's the plan? She looked out through the hangar's shield at the distant stars. We hit them where they don't expect it. Supply convoys, command relays, their soft belly. And then we keep hitting until they understand. Understand what? She turned to him, eyes cold and fierce. That the galaxy made a mistake underestimating Deathworlders. The first strike was against a Verta supply outpost on the moon of Haraxis 4. They dropped in low, skimming the crater ridges under jamming fields. The operation was supposed to be simple. Sabotage the fuel silos, cripple logistics, get out. It wasn't simple. Nothing ever was. As soon as they breached the perimeter, the alarms howled. Verta patrols converging from every direction. Plasma bolts rained down, the air filled with static and smoke. Contact left. Amani yelled, diving behind a wrecked crawler. Han fired a rail burst, cutting through 2 Verta soldiers in a single shot. They're faster this time. Then shoot faster, Mara barked. They moved like ghosts, short bursts, constant motion. Human muscle against alien precision. The fight was brutal, close, personal. By the time the silos blew, the ground itself was shaking. The withdrawal was chaos. Half their dropships destroyed, 3 soldiers lost. But the Verta fuel reserves were gone, a fireball bright enough to be seen from orbit. When they got back to the Resolute Dawn, Command hailed them. Target neutralized, mission success. Mara wiped blood off her visor. Success is relative. Relative or not, Ibarra said. The Verta fleet is pulling back another sector. Whatever you're doing, it's working. She didn't feel victorious. She just felt tired. Months passed. The war shifted. Everywhere the Verta tried to advance, they met resistance that didn't make sense. Human raiders sabotaged their supply lines. Mining colonies exploded rather than surrender. Even their own slave species began to revolt. Inspired by whispers of the Deathworlders, the legend grew faster than the truth, and in every story, the humans were monsters, firewalkers, stone-blooded, soldiers who laughed in the face of death. The irony wasn't lost on Mara. She'd seen too much death to find any glory in it. But if fear kept the enemy at bay, she'd use it. The final battle came, almost a year after Talanis 9. The Verta sent their Grand Armada, thousands of ships, to retake a key human colony on the edge of the Orion Spur. The sky filled with their war forms. It was supposed to be a cleansing, a demonstration of dominance. Instead, it became their nightmare. Because this time, the humans were ready. Orbital mines drifted in dense fields. Nuclear decoys masked real fleet positions. Planetary guns powered by geothermal cores opened fire. Every trap, every dirty trick the Deathworlders could invent, unleashed at once. When the Verta breached the atmosphere, they found nothing but fire. The human fleet surged from the storm clouds below, cutting through them like blades. The battle raged for days. In the end, the Verta flagship was crippled, its core pierced by a kinetic lance that split it in two. From orbit, it looked like the heavens themselves had been set ablaze. After the battle, Mara stood in the observation deck, watching the wreckage drift past. Han joined her silently. Neither spoke for a long time. Then he said, "They'll remember this." "Good," she said. "Think they'll come back?" "Maybe, maybe not. But if they do..." She looked out at the shattered remains of the Verta fleet. "They'll remember Talanis 9. They'll remember what happened when they faced Deathworlders." Han smiled faintly. "And if they forget, then we'll remind them." They stood there side by side, watching the sunrise over a world finally free of war. For the first time in years, Mara let herself breathe. Not the ragged breath of survival, but the quiet one of someone who'd lived long enough to see dawn again. The galaxy had learned the truth the hard way. You could outnumber humans, outgun them, outthink them, but you could never outlast them. Because when the armies were countless and the odds impossible, the Deathworlders still fought, and they never stopped.